Hey everyone, I am joined here by the one and only Dr. Walter Block. Many of you may already know him, but for those who don't, he's the distinguished professor from Loyola University, and he holds the Harold E. Wirth Eminent Scholar Endowed Chair in Economics. He's author of countless books such as Defending the Undefendable, which you can see behind me, but he also has the amazing achievement of having published over 1,000 scholarly articles into academic journals, which is pretty unheard of. Now, I can easily say, Walter, you along with people like Tom Woods are the people that led me down the path to be a scholar. I remember someone years ago mentioned your name, and I looked you up, and I was just hooked on YouTube. So without further ado, I made Walter an offer he couldn't refuse. I asked him to come on and talk about the life of Murray Rothbard for an hour with me, and he was the greatest economist who ever lived, in my opinion. But Walter, thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. One minor correction. I'm hoping to do 1,000 by the time I die, but right now I'm at around 550.
Oh, excuse me. You're at 500. I don't know why I said 1,000. That's right. You're at 500. But yeah.
I'm hoping though.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I guess we're just going to jump right into it and talk about Murray Rothbard. Like I said, I personally think he was the greatest economist of all time. Obviously, he wouldn't have been where he was without Mises, but tell us a little bit about anarcho-capitalism before we start. Just tell us about it.
Well, you know, to me, it's sort of like, who's better, Johann Sebastian Bach or Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart? And I sort of flip back and forth. Sometimes it's Bach, sometimes it's Mozart. I had a little fight with my wife when our first son was born. I wanted to name him Wolfgang, and she said no, but we compromised, and his middle name is Amadeus. Then when my daughter was born, I wanted to name her after Johann Sebastian Bach. I didn't really want to name either of them about Mises and Rothbard because I didn't know what they would be like. And, you know, somehow I figured music is sort of non-confrontational, non-controversial, and no matter what views my kids brought up with, they could still love Mozart and Bach. As it happens, my son is a libertarian, my daughter isn't. But and then we named my daughter Hannah instead of Johann. I wanted Johanna, but Hannah is close enough. So I'm not sure who my favorite composer is, Mozart or Bach, and I'm not sure who my favorite economist is. It's those two, not Mozart and Bach, but rather Mises and Rothbard. But I am sure of one thing, that the greatest libertarian who's ever lived, at least so far, is Murray Rothbard.
You know, what do you think about when you hear like Milton Friedman started libertarianism? That makes me mad. Yeah.
Well, I don't think Milton Friedman started libertarianism. Well, Murray didn't really start it. You know, we go back way before Murray. I don't know.
I guess Murray termed it.
Well, Murray characterized it. Murray is the greatest contributor to it. But, you know, Murray would acknowledge there were libertarians before him. Milton Friedman is sort of a libertarian, but only if you're in a big tent kind of a situation. The way I see the libertarian ballpark or the ball players is at the top of the heap. Oh, by the way, I have to show you my T-shirt.
Hey.
Not so much you, but here. At the top of the heap are the anarcho-capitalists. Those are the people like Murray and myself who believe that the state violates the non-aggression principle, and the non-aggression principle is sort of the bedrock of libertarianism because they compel you to pay taxes whether you want to or not, and you never agreed to.
Well, I was about to say, Milton Friedman, didn't he help institute the withholdings tax?
Yes, he certainly did that. But I'm getting the Milton Friedman. So the top of the heap is anarcho-capitalists, and that's Murray Rothbard. The next group down would be the minarchists, and that's Ayn Rand and Robert Nozick, where you have a government, but it's very limited to protecting people and property rights. And then one level below that is Ron Paul and the Constitution, whatever the Constitution says, interpreted by people like us, not like interpreted by the Supreme Court. And then only in the fourth position do we get to classical liberalism. And here I have Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek, who was sort of free enterprise, but they compromised in so many ways. And the one you mentioned, the withholding tax and the negative income tax and all sorts of deviations. So Milton Friedman, I think you can call him a libertarian if you're a big tent kind of guy and if you're a little generous. But if you're not, you wouldn't call him a libertarian, but certainly you wouldn't call him the godfather of libertarianism or the leader of libertarianism. He was sort of a libertarian, but of a compromising sort. And yes, when people think of libertarianism, they do think of Milton Friedman, not Murray Rothbard, because Milton Friedman won the Nobel Prize, and Milton Friedman was at the University of Chicago, and which is a very famous university, and Murray was at Brooklyn Polytech and then UNLV, which has a good basketball team, but not really.
It was actually you who kind of cleared me up on that one issue with Milton Friedman and school vouchers, because I used to think, yeah, just give the parents a choice and they can go to school. But then you made me realize, hold on, this is competition between government schools. This really isn't that much better.
Yeah, the argument I like to use on that is, suppose restaurants were now governmental. Every restaurant was a government. And Murray Rothbard would say, well, privatize them. And Milton Friedman would say, well, no, let's have a voucher, a restaurant voucher. Let it stay in the public sector. Only now, instead of you have to go to your local restaurant and I have to go to my local restaurant, we now have a voucher. We can go to any government restaurant. Isn't that great? Well, it's not exactly libertarian. So Milton Friedman was sort of a libertarian and sort of an efficiency expert for the state. So I'm not a real big fan of his, but on the other hand, I have to acknowledge he was great on minimum wage and free trade and rent control and occupational licensure. He made a contribution to liberty, but he wasn't exquisitely good. He was no Mozart. He was no Bach.
Oh, I think that was Rothbard's law. He specialized in the things he was worst in.
Yes, he was really good in some things, but what did he specialize in? Money, where he was horrible. He rejected the gold standard or free market money. And then these stupid vouchers. I mean, his whole fortune went to the voucher program. I mean,
well, I'll just give you one example, Walter. My current economics teacher, he's the only free market economist at University of Colorado, Denver. I mentioned the gold standard once, and he just scoffed at me like, that's the stupidest thing you could have. You want to go back to the gold standard? But he's so good on so many things. It's really mind-boggling. It's kind of like when he talked to Thomas Sowell about war. He's like a completely different man when he talks to him about war, but everything else, he's just like, wow, like that. He's an intellectual giant. So it's just like, how do you?
Thomas Sowell is really great. I'm a big fan of his, but he's a warmonger.
Yeah.
So, he's not as good as he could be. But, what the heck? Well,
you know what? Forget these Chicago school guys. Let's jump into Murray Rothbard. Born to David and Ray Rothbard, his dad was a chemist. Now, one thing that surprised me, and I just learned this today, I did not know that Murray got his bachelor's in mathematics. And one thing I just want to point out, I think, wasn't Mises's brother like a famous mathematician? And, I guess the point is that Austrian economists are thought of as being anti-scientific and anti-math, and in reality, I think we just state that humans are a little bit too complicated to be variables in some equation.
No, Richard von Mises, Ludwig von Mises' brother, was a famous mathematician. Murray was very knowledgeable about math. And it's a mistake to think that Austrians are against math or against statistics or against econometrics. Rather, it's a little bit more complicated. The correct view is we Austrians, unlike them, thar mainstream economist types, we believe that there are economic laws which you don't have to test, which you can't test. For example, I'm now going to buy you a lovely blue shirt, and I'm going to pay you $20 for it, and we agree. Well, I value that blue shirt more than $20 if I buy it from you, and you value my $20 more than your blue shirt if you're willing to make the deal. Now, we don't know the reason for this. You might be willing to make the deal. You really value the shirt at 50, but you think I'll give you an A in the course where I'm not even your teacher. So we don't know why you're willing to make the deal. We don't know why I'm willing to make the deal. All we know is that I value what I'm receiving more than what I'm giving, ex ante, and the reverse for you. And you can't test this. The very idea to test this is grotesque, because if you understand the English language, you know that this is a law. Now, the Chicagoites or the mainstream don't believe in any economic laws. They're logical positivists. They think that everything has to be tested, that there can only be hypotheses. Namely, it's a hypothesis that has to be tested through econometrics to see if voluntary trade is mutually beneficial in the ex ante sense.
And when you say economic law, are you talking about like as a matter of fact, like praxeology? It's a matter of fact that humans act purposely. It doesn't matter if they're acting malevolently, benevolently, or self-harming.
Right. It's praxeological because to deny that human beings act purposefully is to act purposefully. So you're sort of caught in the bramble tree or something.
I had never thought about it like that. That's a good point.
But on the other hand, we Austrians believe that another part of economics, economic history, if you will, you have to have statistics. For example, we suppose the price of bananas go up by 20%. We know as a law that other things equal, people will buy fewer bananas. But how many fewer? We don't know. Is it 10% fewer, 20% fewer, 30% fewer? In order to do that, you have to test it econometrically. So we're not against doing that. And even on rent control or minimum wage or any of these other things where we have laws, we can still use econometrics, only we're not testing it. Rather, we're illustrating it. So there's nothing wrong per se with econometrics or mathematical economics or what have you. It's just that we believe in laws that you can't test, but the laws test the econometrics rather than the econometrics test the law.
That definitely makes sense. All right. Well, what was Murray Rothbard's life growing up? Did he grow up poor? Did he grow up rich? Because he was born in the Bronx, correct?
I'm not even sure about that. I'm not a historian of Murray Rothbard. David Gordon would be much better on questions like that. I didn't know he was brought up in the Bronx. I thought he was brought up in Manhattan, and I think he went to some sort of public school, and he was bullied when he was a little kid, and then they put him in this Birch Wathen school where he flowered and prospered and did very well. And then he went to get his PhD at Columbia University. Now, I happen to know a little bit about that, and I know that Murray was one of the best economists ever, but he had a lot of trouble getting his PhD because he and Arthur Burns were at odds. And when Arthur Burns was there, he wouldn't allow Murray's dissertation, and Arthur Burns was sort of the cock of the walk, or the ganze Macher, as they say in Yiddish, or the big shot at Columbia. And while he was there, Murray couldn't get his PhD. Happily, Nixon got in. I shouldn't say that. I'm crossing my fingers. And he made Arthur Burns head of the Fed. And when Arthur Burns was away, Murray snuck in and got his PhD.
And just to be sure, this is, I don't know if you could see this, Panic of 1819. That was Murray's dissertation, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, I don't know if you can tell. I think every single Murray Rothbard book behind me. And yeah, I'm a fan.
I've got a few of them myself.
Oh, I bet. Now, was he an exceptional student? I mean, when he was going through college, was he a straight A student or?
Again, I'm sorry, I don't know.
Okay.
I expect he was, but I really don't know if he was an A student. I just expect he was because he was very bright.
I mean, I wonder what his IQ was. I really wonder that.
When I was a kid, like in the 8th grade, I had 140 IQ. And then I wanted to get into Mensa, and I had like 115 or something like that, and you needed 130. And then I took it again, and I realized that the IQ test was a speed test, and you just don't think, you just write. And then I got like a 190, so I got into Mensa. So I think that the IQ test is good for people who have a lower IQ than the people who make up the test.
Yeah.
But people who are smarter than the people who make up the test, I'm not sure about the veracity of it. So I don't know if Murray had a high IQ. I think if he took the test fast, he would have had a high IQ. And if he just took it leisurely, he wouldn't. Although there is something, business with numbers forward and numbers backward. Like if I tell you, repeat back after me, 1 3 5 7 9 11, everyone can do that pretty well. But if I now say repeat it backward, 11 9 7 5 3 1, with not as easy a number, now that separates the sheep from the goats, and now that is an IQ test that's impervious to any criticism of regatta, or certain people don't know certain words, or you're from a foreign country, or what have you. So I'm a fan of the IQ, but within limitations, and I expect that Murray's IQ was exquisite, and even more important perhaps than an IQ would be his creativity. And obviously there's a correlation between smartness and creativity, but on the creativity sweepstakes in economics, there's no one, with the possible exception of Mises, who I would put on a higher level than Murray.
Definitely agree. And 1962 was a great year. I guess you called it the year anarcho-capitalism was started, but what was the first piece you ever read by Murray? Or maybe you can preface that just starting, how did you meet Murray? What was the first thing you read by him?
Well, how did I meet Murray? That's an interesting story. Larry Moss was in my class. I was a student at Columbia University getting my PhD. I had been converted to minarchism by Ayn Rand and Nathaniel Branden. And I was a freshman, a first-year student in graduate school. And Larry Moss said, you must meet this guy, Murray Rothbard, because Larry and I had a kinship with each other, based on the questions we would ask in class. We both knew that we were free enterprises. And he said, you must meet this guy, Murray Rothbard. He's an anarchist. And I said, an anarchist? I don't want to meet him. The anarchists are crazy. They want to throw bombs or whatever it is. And I just refused to meet Murray because he was an anarchist, and I was sort of a Randian, not a cultish one, but a Randian in the sense of limited government is the only way to go. And then finally, Larry's roommate, Jerry Wallows, Jerry and Larry ganged up on me. I remember it was on the street corner right near Columbia. They didn't use violence, but they ganged up on me, and they said, you must meet Murray, you must meet Murray. And finally, I agreed. And before I met him, I figured, he was a guy maybe 6'10" with muscles here, sort of like, I don't know, Muhammad Ali, and holding a rifle here and a spear here. And, he would be a macho guy because that was the impression I had of him. And I meet this short, fat little Jewish guy who, my big problem with Murray is stomach cramps. He would have me in stitches for hour after hour after hour, just laughing.
I'm like that when I listen to him on YouTube. He just has me. Oh yeah.
Oh, he was horrible. I mean, and he was such a sweetie pie.
Yeah.
I remember one time I started reading Rothbard and Mises, and I realized that, and Murray converted me to anarchism in about 5 minutes. And he had a picture of Mises on the wall. And I said, Murray, why do you have a picture of Mises on the wall? He's not an anarchist. And Murray just sort of smiled at me. I mean, I was such an idiot when I was a kid. Any reasonable person would have smacked me for saying that. But Murray was just so gentle with me and with many other people. And he just sort of smiled and said, well, you'll catch on, or you'll get the point. Just keep reading Mises. Yes, he was an anarchist, but, So Murray was very gentle and very loving and very lovely and very, very funny. Even Bill Buckley, who was no friend of Murray Rothbard's, conceded or acknowledged the fact that Murray was very funny. And he would call Murray and his merry band, which I think was appropriate, apropos for Murray, because he was, just hilarious.
Yeah.
I mean, in addition to his genius, and the fact that he was not just a genius in economics, but in history and in psychology and sociology and philosophy and mathematics, and just he was sort of like a Renaissance man, a genius in everything practically.
He knew like everything about baseball, everything about. I mean, he was just really like an autodidact.
Yeah, sort of like a little bit like David Gordon, who was. Well, an autodidact is someone who learned it all on his own, but he was sort of like I forget what the word is, where you know everything about everything.
Yeah, I think Rothbard said, Gordon's a universal genius, and like it's the saddest thing that he never lived up to his full potential, which I disagree. I think he's done quite a bit, but he is like, I hear people say they talk to David Gordon, and Gordon's like, yeah, you're going to want to go check out page 456, third paragraph down, second word, like he's that exact all the time. Yeah,
I don't think Murray was encyclopedic in that way. I remember when I first met David Gordon, said, "Oh, you're Walter Block. You published the, and give me the title and the journal name and the page number and all that." And I don't remember any of that. And David Gordon does that with everyone. So David Gordon is like an encyclopedia. Murray wasn't quite like that, but he was very knowledgeable about many, many things, including baseball and jazz music and also movies. He was Mr. First Nighter in Libertarian Forum. So
let me just ask that question real quick, because I solicited some questions from like the Tom Woods Facebook group, and one question was, Murray used to do movie reviews. I don't know if you've ever read a Star Wars review. Hilarious. He calls Carrie Fisher ugly and abrasive, but what were his favorite kind of movies, and what was his favorite movie, if you know?
Well, I don't know about his favorite movie, but I remember there was a movie that I attended with Murray, and it had John Wayne as some soldier in the Vietnam War, and he was called Bulldog. And Murray was trying to radicalize the whole movie theater, and he was saying, kill Bulldog. Bulldog was John Wayne, the hero, because he's killing all the Orientals or whoever we were, Vietnamese. So Murray was something else.
I recall a story Tom once told. I think it was a few months before Murray died, and Murray sat down next to Tom. And it was right when Jeffrey Dahmer got killed in prison, and Murray looks at Tom and is just like, they got him.
No, Murray was a man of the people as well. I mean, I remember one time some TV thing, what they'll do is they'll interview the man in the bus or the man on the street. And Murray looks like the man on the street. He doesn't look, particularly, he's not a movie star looking or anything like that. And they start interviewing Murray, and they're expecting some ignorant fool who, like Jay Leno used to do interviews on the street, and people would misunderstand 2 + 2 is 4, or things like that. And they're getting this Murray, very erudite, very articulate, and they were sort of whoa.
I can't remember who told the story. It was a guy talking about how he signed up for a Murray Rothbard economics class, and he said he walked into the class late and people were just furiously taking notes. Like, and when I listen to Rothbard talk, like I've tried to listen to Rothbard speeches and take notes, and man, I got to play it like half as slow just to like get some of the main points across, because he could pack so much into a lecture. It's incredible.
By the way, I have to brag in 2 regards with regard to Murray. One, I am honored by the fact that once or twice, Murray asked me to take his place at Brooklyn Polytech when he had a Mrs. class.
Wow. Never knew that.
I taught Murray's intro micro class. I don't know how many other people can say that, but I can say that.
That's something special.
Second bragging is I've co-authored a lot of things with a lot of people. And one of my co-authors is Murray Rothbard.
What was that on?
I'm sorry?
Well, what piece was that?
It was the Introduction to the Review of Austrian Economics.
You remember what year?
I don't remember what year it was, but the first year that the Review of Austrian Economics came out.
I mean, I'll look for Murray Rothbard, Walter Block intro, but yeah.
I think I can say without failing, without a mistake, that I'm the only co-author he ever had. And also, really? I have a lot more in common with Murray. We're both short, fat Jews. We both married Christian girls. Both of the Christian girls were taller than us. We both got PhDs at Columbia. We're both from New York City. And I think in some ways I'm closer to Murray than anyone else on the planet in those 4 or 5 regards. Now, Hans Hoppe was very, very close to Murray, but Hans is not a short, fat Jew. Hans isn't from Brooklyn or New York City. Hans didn't get his PhD from Columbia. Hans didn't marry a woman who was taller than him. So I'm beating. Who's competitive with Hans? Not me. But, but in this regard, Murray and I are very, very close.
Yeah. Well, I have another really good question for you, and this is kind of an oddball question. The Koch brothers, they're obviously this big right-wing, everybody hates the Koch brothers, especially the past few years. And I read some of your books. I noticed the Koch brothers donated back then, but what happened with Koch and Murray? Because from my understanding, I think it was Charles Koch ran for office and just kind of gave up on his principles, and Murray called him out on it. And when you think was that not?
That's not what happened. Charles Koch, I don't think, ever ran for office. David Koch, his brother, ran for vice president.
That's who it was.
With who was it? Ed Clark, I think it was, on the Libertarian Party ticket. But I don't think that was the breaking point between Murray and Charles Koch. First of all, I have to tell you a Charles Koch story.
Sure, great.
My wife and I and his wife and he were standing on a sidewalk in, I don't remember where it was, Scotland, England, somewhere around there. And along comes this drunken guy who says, the sidewalks are for walking, not standing. We were standing on the sidewalk. You 4 people get into the gutter and allow me to pass. Now, he said this in a drunken way. I'm just articulating it more clearly. And you know what Charles did? He went like that. He assumed the boxing position.
Wow.
And I mean, this was in the 70s, maybe before Charles Koch was Charles Koch. You'd think a guy like that, he's a super duper multi-zillionaire, billionaire, trillionaire, whatever he is. You'd think he'd have 5 bodyguards, but there were no bodyguards. And he's ready to fight this guy. That was,
I got to ask, how did you know him? Was he just like a donor, or was he actually a good friend at the time? Or
this was the time when Murray and Charles were friendly.
Okay.
It was a conference in Windsor Castle in England, and then we went to Scotland, and we went here and there. I forget where we were. So Charles and Murray met, and Charles and Murray had an affinity for each other and supported each other. And I mean, Charles had the money and the ideas, and Murray didn't have much money, but he had a lot of ideas. And I think the initiation of the Cato Institute was at the behest of Murray's suggestion, and Charles put up the money for it. And I think even the name Cato was a Murray suggestion based on
Cato's letter.
But then they had a falling out. Murray didn't see the Cato Institute as being as radical as Murray wanted, and Charles was happy with it. But then again, by this time I was sort of out in Canada. From 79 and 91, I was in Canada. And a lot of this stuff happened when I was out of the picture. So I only had like a third, second-hand or a third-hand view of this. But so I'm just giving you what I know about it, but I might not be as accurate as I could be. But they had a falling out. I think part of it was over personality. Part of it was over ideology, and they had a falling out. And I don't know. I have to mention something else with Charles Koch, and that is that several of his people came to me when I was in New Orleans, maybe 15 years ago. And they said, we like what you're doing, namely with students. I've got a lot of students who are now professors, went to get PhDs, and are now promoting liberty.
But
we like what you're doing. How can we help you do more of it? I said, well, give me some money. And they gave me money. And they still support me and my colleagues to the tune of, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 a year, something, for them, not big, but for me, gigantic. And I'm very grateful to them. On the other hand, I'm very, very associated with the Mises Institute. And the Mises Institute was Murray's home, and Lou Rockwell is in charge of it. And there's a great enmity between Lou Rockwell and Murray on the one hand, and Charles and his group on the other hand. And I don't know, if ever anyone needs a referee, I'm friendly with those. Maybe I could be that referee, or that person who puts an end to this fight. That's
interesting. It's just been like a long going thing. I mean, that was interesting. I wanted to ask about that. Now, here's a really, really interesting question. I was listening to you talk about Murray once, and you said, quote, Murray was such a fun guy. He used to, quote, drink and smoke. Did Murray used to drink and smoke or do anything fun? Because obviously he wasn't a hippie. We know what he thought about hippies, but what did he do that was considered bad for Murray?
Well, Murray thought about hippies roughly the way that Cartman of South Park thinks about hippies. By the way, Cartman is one of my favorite characters in all. And Murray is a little bit like Cartman in some ways, certainly on the hippie question. Murray was the kind of person that your parents warned you against. He would drink alcohol. He would sometimes smoke, and he would stay up late.
Now, would he smoke cigars or cigarettes? I just can't imagine what he'd be smoking.
I don't even remember him smoking. I'm not sure. He would certainly drink alcohol. And my parents were, you can have wine on Yom Kippur or something like that, or Shabbos, and that's about it. And Murray would drink the hard stuff sometimes. I mean, he wasn't, a heavy drinker, but he would drink alcohol, and he would stay up late. A typical Murray evening or day would be he'd get up at around 2 p.m, and he'd go to sleep at 6 a.m. or 5 a.m. or something like that. So he stayed out late, he drank, and, he's sort of the person that my parents would say, stay away from, because, he'll lead you astray. He was not a hippie. Obviously he was not a hippie, and he enjoyed a party, and he would have dinner at this jazz place on Broadway near his house. He lived on 88th Street, and there were places where they played jazz, and he would.
I heard his favorite type of music was jazz. Someone told me. Is that true?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And I just didn't take him for a jazz guy. I don't know what I imagined him listening to. Just not jazz. I don't know.
Well, I used to tease him and say that, when I took over as Emperor of the Universe, there'd be no more jazz. There'd be just Mozart and Bach. So you better enjoy it while you can. We were just being silly.
Well, let's see here. I mean, I could probably talk to you for freaking hours about Murray Rothbard. What was one of the last memories you had with him?
Wow. Well, he passed away while I was in Canada, and I hadn't seen him all that much, but we would communicate a little bit by mail and by phone. I don't know. I don't remember exactly the last time I had much interface with him. I remember going to his funeral, and I don't know, there must have been 600 or 700 people there. And it was a very sad event. He was only 68 years old. I think.
How did he die?
He was in the dentist's chair getting his teeth fixed, and I think he had a heart attack or a stroke or something like that, right on the dentist's chair.
Wow.
It was,
that is not the way for a guy like him to go, man.
I think of him a lot nowadays. Every time something happens, like with Trump or, going into Syria or the political correctness I wish I think of Murray pretty much every day. And I wish that he were here. I know he's up there somewhere, even though I'm an atheist. I think he's up there somewhere looking down on us and rooting us on and, trying to help us to promote liberty and good Austrian economics. But we miss him. When the Godfather died in the Godfather movies, they said this gang lost half its power with one guy. Well, I think it's very similar. Murray was half of the movement, in a sense. Yeah. I mean, he was only one guy, and when I first met Murray, and I asked him how many libertarians there were, and this must have been in 1965 or 6. He said 25 libertarians in the whole world, and now they're, I don't know, in the millions. Probably.
Oh, I think Murray, I think it's true. He is looking down, and I think he's so proud of how far the movement's come. When did the Mises Institute start? It was in the 80s.
I think 82.
82, yeah. I mean,
I'm not sure.
I honestly can't believe how far the movement's come just since like 2012. I was a typical, found out about Ron Paul, and eventually found out about Tom Woods, and just led me down the path to be a scholar. And I'm so happy because I would have been a socialist. You talk about how, Hayek was a socialist, you were a socialist, and literally Pinkos. But I took one economics class, and I had a girl in front of me. She was a hardcore leftist, and she asked the teacher, why can't we just print more money? And my teacher was probably no Austrian economist, but he understood scarcity. He explained that, money has value because it's scarce. So that one moment changed my life. That one moment led me to be talking to Dr. Walter Block right now.
You mentioned Ron Paul. I wanted to mention Ron Paul a little bit because Ron Paul was one of Murray's friends, one of his important friends, one of his best friends. And Ron Paul was once accused of being an anti-Semite. And the response was, well, who are two of his favorite friends, mentors, gurus? And it was Mises and Rothbard, both of whom were Jewish. So it's hard to see how Ron Paul is exactly an anti-Semite. I mean, he had certain views on Israel that people didn't like, but to think of him as an anti-Semite is preposterous. It's grotesque because his two heroes were both Jews.
Oh, Tom told a story once that, Lou Rockwell used to be called Jew Rockwell because all his friends around him were Jews. And it's like, how are you an anti-Semite? And yeah, it doesn't make any sense. That was probably gonna be my last question for you, is Murray often gets the rep of being a self-hating Jew. And it just kind of doesn't really make sense. Maybe you can just tackle that.
Well, I have different views on Israel than Murray, which is, and by the way, I have different views than Murray on maybe 10 different issues, and I published articles, at least half of them while he was alive, and he never, ever once even hinted at being angry at me on any of this. For example, voluntary slavery, I think it's a legitimate contract. He doesn't on Israel. That came up later. Whereas with Ayn Rand, you disagree with her on the slightest jot or tittle of anything, and that's it for you.
Right.
He was a cultist. Murray was never like that. Murray was friendly with people who disagreed with him. Murray is a pro-choice person. Ron Paul is a pro-life person. They're 180 degrees apart on the issue of abortion or babies and all, and yet Murray and Ron were fast friends. So Murray is not the kind of a guy to break with you because you have a disagreement on, you know, one or two issues.
Right. I think you mentioned once that Murray was going up to give a speech, and he was going to kind of criticize Mises, and he was just sweating, shaking, like, I'm about to go criticize my mentor. I think maybe from that perspective, he realized the leap he had to take to get to anarcho-capitalism. Like, hey, like, violence and coercion is always wrong. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
You know, I model my life many ways on Murray. Murray always insisted that I call him Murray, so I insist that my students call me Walter, not Murray. Call me Walter. I had another story I wanted to share with you. Murray was once talking about money, and he said, here's a sheet of paper that says 10 Rothbards. And he was saying, you know, nobody would take that. And I raised my hand and said, Murray, I'll take it. I'll take it. I tell you. And Murray said, shut up. I'm trying to make a point here. Now, obviously, I was just being silly. But I tell you, if I had a sheet of paper that said 10 Rothbards in his handwriting, that thing would be worth thousands now.
Oh, yeah.
So Murray was wrong. Well, really.
You know, I honestly have one really, really good last question. I know we agreed to an hour, so we'll wrap it up. But tell me about, I have two small questions. Maybe you can combine them all. What was Murray's typewriter? And what was Murray's apartment like? Because I don't know, does someone still live there nowadays? I don't know. When's the last time you've been in Murray's old apartment?
Well, I haven't been in his apartment for a long time, but every time the Mises Institute has a supportive summit in New York City, what we do is we get this bus and we go around to Mises' house and Murray's house and NYU, where Mises gave seminars, and Columbia. And we just passed Murray's house a year or so ago, and the house is still there. And he was on the second floor, so I could practically see in, but I didn't see much of anything.
What was the apartment look like? Like when you walked in, like, was it a big, small area? Because I hear the stories that everyone was always in Murray's apartment. Well,
there was the Murray's living room, and I sort of see the Mises Institute as the Murray's living room writ large.
Yeah.
Murray had you walked into his living room and you turn to the right and you're in the living room. And it's the living room where we all sat around and giggled over everything. Behind the living room was their bedroom. And then there was a lavatory. And then there was Murray's office. And then there was this long, long hall, maybe 30, 40 feet long, and very high ceilings. And on both sides, you sort of had to squeeze into that hallway because on both sides there were bookcases up to the ceiling full. And now in the Mises Institute, there is a place in their library with just has Murray's books. And Murray would underline, you know, pretty much everything when he would read a book, and he'd write, you know, marginal comments.
Right.
And weren't too kind to the author.
So that was no joke. His house was literally full of books.
Oh, full of books. And then once you get past the hall, then there's the kitchen. So that was Murray's apartment. He only wrote on a typewriter. Computers were just sort of coming in, and, you know, old dogs, new tricks, and, you know, people were trying to push him into computers, and he was going, whack, whack. I don't like to brag, but that's a good interpretation of Murray responding, whack, whack. So he wouldn't really get into computers. Probably had he lived longer, he would have, but it was just coming in at the time, and he just had a typewriter, and you'd be little crossouts and use the whiteout. And I have to tell you another story about me and Murray.
Please do.
Years ago when I first started writing, I would keep track of how many words I would write or how many pages I would write. And my usual page is 300 words. And if I did 5 pages of 300 words, 1,500 words, I was happy with myself. A lot of days I didn't quite make that, but many days I did. And every once in a while I would do 10 or maybe 15 pages. One day I got up early in the morning. I stayed up until the next morning at 2 in the morning. And at the end of the day, I had 23 pages. So I called Murray, and this was like way better than anything else I'd ever done. I'm not talking about the quality of it, but just the quantity. So I called Murray and said, well, how many pages can you write in a day? I'm, trying to compare with the master. And Murray goes, who keeps track of that? And I kept pressing. I kept pressing. And finally, what he said is, what was
8
it?
pages an hour.
8 pages an hour.
I've heard you tell that story a lot, but that's a really, really great story.
So in my best day, I did 3 of his hours roughly, but it took me a whole day. And,
Yeah.
there were all these sorts of stories of, Murray didn't realize he had a deadline for paper and he ducks out into the office for 2 hours and comes out with 16 pages of just brilliant stuff right on the stupid typewriter. And,
someone was talking, or I was reading something, and it was talking about how they were going through Murray's old records and just reading like his old manuscripts. This guy would hardly make any spelling errors, hardly any grammatical errors. When he would go back over his writing, he would just put like a big red X through things he didn't like. He wouldn't, it was just kind of crazy reading this. It's like, how do you write that well? It's like he noticed all the grammatical errors before they occurred.
Well, how does Mozart write? How does Bach write? How does Mises write? How does Rothbard write?
Yeah.
If I were a religious person, I would say God was helping them. I'm not. I'm not religious, so I would just say they were geniuses, and geniuses write. Look, I never compared the quality of what I wrote compared to the man, just the quantity. And in the quantity, he was just amazing. 8 pages an hour. A good typist, 100 words an hour, could do better than Murray.
Just typing what they're copying, though, he was producing new ideas. Yeah,
absolutely. So he was. If economics and liberty had ever gone out of fashion, he might have made a living as a typist.
Yeah. Well, geez, Walter. I'm sitting here. I'm thinking of like 10 questions for every question I ask you. I'm gonna have to call it. Can we do this again soon?
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
Oh, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Walter. We'll see you next time. Hey everyone, please like, follow, donate, subscribe, and share. Any donations will be used to reach more people.